The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, greetings. Welcome to another presentation in this public service nation building series, The Law and You. This is program number 947, coming to you on Monday the 26th of August 2019. On this program, I will speak to you on the topic, improving our democracy. But before getting into the topic, a few short preliminary remarks. Firstly, and as usual, my condolences go out to all families which have suffered recent bereavements, and in particular the family of Mr. Scott, who I understand was just married about the 4th of August, yes, and on his way to the airport to come back to St. Vincent with his bride, the cabinet secretary, apparently took in and died. So sad, and my heart goes out to the whole of the family. I know he had a little son who attended the same preschool, primary school as my own grandson, and the reports I've had is that the father and son were extremely close. What a pity. Secondly, I would like to, on behalf of our Archbishop, His Eminence, the Most Reverend Melford Pompey, say thank you to all those people who supported the Archdiocesan dinner which we held on Saturday night, the 24th of August, at the Calicut Town Hall. Very well attended, very well supported, and the Archbishop and Council would like to thank all of you who came and the ladies who spearheaded the venture. And finally, we are all, I hope, battened down for the passage of Tropical Storm Dorian. I could only repeat what the officials are saying, that you must heed their advice, take the precautions which every year we are told we should take as we prepare for a storm, and let us continue to pray and hope that the good Lord would be kind to us. Okay, now for the topic of the evening, improving our democracy. Excuse me. As we all know, the ULP government has been in office since 2001. The elections of 2001 were keenly fought. Both of the major parties, the New Democratic Party and the Unity Labour Party, published manifestos. And both parties promised in their 2001 manifesto that they would implement constitutional reform, so that the reforming of our constitution was something that both parties promised the people of this country they would do. Why is it that the reforming of the constitution was regarded as necessary? Well, we had the Constitution since 1979, and over the years, we saw that there were several weaknesses in the governance of the country. Both parties over the years highlighted several issues which were wrong. And those of you who were around at the time would recall that when in 1989 the New Democratic Party swept the polls and won all 15 seats. We had, in fact, a one-party parliament where there was not a single representative of the Unity Labour Party. Well, at the time it was the St. Vincent Labour Party. But the opposition got about 33% of the vote, but didn't have a single seat to show for it. Nor were they permitted to have an opposition senator appointed. We went through 5 years in this country, 1989 to 1994, without any opposition in Parliament at all. I had the distinction and the honor of being the Attorney General during that time, and I am pleased to say, because of the restraint showed by the government led by the Honorable Sir James Mitchell, not a single person went to court alleging that their rights were violated by the government, even though we had all the seats in the House. And Mr. Mitchell and his government at the time must be given credit. There was no abuse of power. But something is surely wrong with a constitution that allows one party to govern the affairs of the country with no provision for the other party, for an opposition to be represented in the parliament. That's just one of the weaknesses of the Constitution. But since ULP took over in 2001, there have been several complaints by the opposition of various abuses of power and various things. Most of those complaints are based on weaknesses in the existing Constitution. One of the glaring weaknesses of this 1979 Constitution is that it does not permit any opposition to bring to Parliament any measure, be it a motion or a bill, which calls for the spending of money by the government. And you may say, well, that's odd. Surely they have been elected to represent people, and they should have the right to make a proposal by way of a motion in Parliament calling on the government to spend money on this, that, and the other. Well, the Constitution says no. It says only a member of Parliament who has the authority conferred on him or her by a minister of government can bring before the House any motion for the spending of public monies. And if you think about it, you will say, well, there's something very crazy about that. That's craziness. Well, it's part of the existing Constitution. But to me, the central weakness of this present Constitution, which we have been living under since 1979, is that it makes no provision for the sharing of power. This, along with several other constitutions given to former British colonies by the British authorities, is called a winner-takes-all constitution, which means that whichever party wins general elections, they get practically 100% of state power, state authority. And the losing party, no matter what percentage of the population supported them, get practically no power, no authority. Their only authority is to go to Parliament and make noise, which the government is free to ignore. There is nothing in the Constitution which calls for a meaningful input into governance, into policy making by those in opposition. They just have to wait their time, and if they win elections, they will get all the state power. Now, the winner takes all system is clearly bad for us because it encourages tribalism of the most vicious kind. But that is the Constitution under which we live. So that is not surprising that in 2001, the two parties, the two major parties, NDP and ULP, each said in its manifesto, if elected to office, we will set up a process to re-examine the Constitution with a view to reforming the Constitution. In other words, to tailor the Constitution to make it more suited for the needs of a growing independent country. And that is why in 2002, a mechanism was set up by a resolution in Parliament supported by both parties to set up a constitutional review mechanism. And the Constitutional Review Commission was born. We got going earnestly in 2003. I had the honor to have been the chairman, the deputy chairman first, and then when His Excellency Nick Liverpool became President of Dominica, or was invited to head the Dominica state, he relinquished the office of chairman, and I, as his deputy, became the chairman of the CRC. We embarked, as you all know, on a series of missions, locally, regionally, and internationally, to gather the views of Vincentians and to sensitize our people at home and in the diaspora of certain constitutional matters. The CRC was made up of representatives of the ruling party, the ULP, representatives of the main opposition party, the NDP, and representatives from civil society. The majority of the persons on the CRC represented civil society organizations and institutions. There were about 26 of us. And we functioned for years. We sent missions throughout the Caribbean. We sent a team to Trinidad and Tobago, one to Barbados, one to Jamaica, one to the British Virgin Islands. We sent teams to the United States of America, to Canada, and to England, speaking about constitutional review and getting the views of Vincentians, looking for ways in which we could improve the Constitution. That was our mandate. Both parties, the ULP and the NDP, were working together. Dr. Gonsalves would propose resolutions in Parliament. Mr. Eustace, as leader of the opposition, would second them. And so we worked along together and eventually came up with a framework. Unfortunately, two of the leading issues which the CRC recommended to the joint House of Parliament were rejected by both parties. We had proposed that civil society should be a third component of the parliament. You see, traditionally, parliament is government and opposition. Government elected members, government senators, opposition elected members, opposition senators. And that laid the foundation for political tribalism, because the parties functioned practically as two tribes. In all our deliberations and discussions, we felt that the majority of persons recommended that there should be a tripartite parliament. There should be three bodies represented in the parliament: government, opposition, and civil society. The two parties, ULP and NDP, said, no, we don't want any civil society in this new constitution. If they want to come into parliament, let them join one party or the other. And they shut down that recommendation we had made. We said, well, they are the bosses. We also recommended the formation of a body called NACE, the National Advisory Council of Elders, to be made up of persons who had held high office in the state as an informal council of wise persons to comment on matters of public concern from time to time. Not having any power, not having any authority to change anything the government or opposition did, but having the ability to give the nation the benefit of their wisdom. The two parties said, no, we don't want that. Government and opposition, NDP and ULP, no. But all the other matters which you will find or have found in the proposed constitution, the two parties agreed on. Now, when a resolution was passed in Parliament on the 17th of July 2007, proposed by the Prime Minister, seconded by the leader of the opposition, to accept basically the proposals which the CRC had refined after having met with Parliament several times jointly, and to set up a drafting committee of persons who would draft the Constitution, one from the government, one from the opposition, and the third one would have come from the CRC. Now, 10 days after the resolution was passed, remember I said it was proposed by the government and seconded by the opposition. Dr. Gonsalves proposed it, the Honorable Anna Eustace seconded it. Both parties were working together with the rest of CRC. Both parties felt at last we have a set of proposals which would improve governance in St. Vincent and Grenadines, which would make our democracy better. But 10 days after that, the opposition wrote a letter to the government threatening to pull out of the process unless 4 matters were addressed by the government. Now, the 4 matters they raised had nothing to do with the Constitution. So when people come and tell me that one of the reasons why the Constitution failed in the referendum is because the government was not responding to things which the opposition wanted to change, I said, no, get your facts right. And I challenge anybody to show me a single document in which the opposition set out various things they wanted, which were not in the new Constitution, and various changes they wanted to make in the new Constitution. There is no such document because there is nothing that the opposition indicated that they did not agree with in this document which was put before the people in the referendum. I told you already, Both parties are working together hand in glove as a team, jointly, in unity. But in those 10 days between the 17th of July and the 27th of July, when Mr. Eustace wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, Mr. Eustace complained about 4 matters, and he said if the government didn't address those 4 matters, the NDP would pull out of the constitutional process. Those matters were, and I will quote you from the letter, for the last 4 years, our Constitution, the supreme law of the land, is being reviewed with the ultimate aim of strengthening good governance in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a process the opposition supported. In these circumstances, it is high time that we get the report of the supervisor of elections for the 2005 poll, that Senator Francis publicly explained how he got access to the number of Syrians who voted in the 2001 and 2005 elections for the late Michael Hamlet and Senator Francis, that the ULP billboards be dismantled, and that Mr. Rodney Adams, the supervisor of elections, resign his position. Those are the 4 things that the opposition complained about. Not a word about what is in the Constitution. They said they wanted the report of the 2005 elections. They wanted the ULP billboards taken down. They wanted Senator Francis to explain how he knew how many Syrians voted for him and Michael Francis. And they wanted Rodney Adams, supervisor of elections, to resign. Well, there was an exchange of correspondence between 2007 and 2008 between the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition. Eventually, the leader of the opposition, on the 3rd of September 2008, wrote a letter to the Prime Minister referring to the earlier correspondence, and says, I specifically requested that these issues be dealt with. 1, that the report of the supervisor of elections be published. 2, that Senator Francis publicly explain how he got access to the number of Syrians who voted in the 2001 and 2005 elections for the late Michael Hamlet and himself. 3, that the ULP billboards be dismantled, and 4, that Rodney Adams, the supervisor of elections, resigns from his position. Mr. Eustace continued, I am of the opinion that my letter of July last year was not taken seriously. To date, 2 of the conditions have been met, namely the dismantling of the billboards and the report of the supervisor of elections, which we received in July, some 30 months after the election. The other 2 conditions have not been met, Mr. Eustace said. The parliamentary opposition will not, NOT in capital letters underlined, will not rejoin the process until the current supervisor of elections leaves his post and Senator Francis explains how he got the information in regard to the Syrian voters. Please be guided accordingly. So, by letter of 3rd September 2008, the opposition pulled out because 4 of the conditions had not been met. Nothing to do with the proposed constitution. I'm telling you, there is no document published anywhere in any newspaper or in any medium in St. Vincent and Grenadines saying the opposition disagrees with clause so-and-so and therefore we are not satisfied. Nothing of the sort, because everybody agreed with everything that was in the Constitution. But in those 10 days between the 17th of July 2007 and the 27th of July 2007, the opposition changed its mind. I know why. I know exactly what happened, but it's not appropriate for me to go into that at this time. Now, you may say, we didn't know anything about that. How do you mean you didn't know anything about that? There was a 4-page pullout published in all the newspapers before the referendum by the CRC, and I personally drafted and wrote this document. It's called 60 significant improvements in the proposed 2009 Constitution. And one by one, from 1 right down to number 60, I pointed out the things in the new Constitution which were improvements on the the existing Constitution. I said, these are the changes we have proposed, and those are the 60 changes which we held forward as beneficial changes, improvements in this document. I'm going to ask the government to publish this again, just as it is, for independence, because people really ought to be reminded of their history. And I don't understand. In the referendum, I heard all sorts of things about the people don't like this and that about the new constitution, about the proposed new constitution. And when you look at what they're quarreling with, they have clearly misunderstood what was in here, didn't take the trouble to read it, and came up with all sorts of flimsy excuses, but the process had become political. And that is why at the end of the last week's program, I said, I hold both parties responsible, and I'll tell you why. I hold the NDP responsible for pulling out of the process for matters not having anything to do with the Constitution. And I hold the ULP responsible for not supporting the process as their leader, the Prime Minister, had asked them to do. This is the evidence. In 2005, in the general elections, 32,009 persons voted for the ULP. 32,009 in 2005. Yet in the referendum, the yes vote was 22,646 and the no votes 29,167. So if 32 people could vote for ULP, 32,000 people in 2005, what became of them in 2009 when their leader had begged them to support the new constitution? 10,000 of them almost did not come out to support the new constitution, because the total yes vote was 22,646. Now compare that to how ULP voted in 2010, 1 year after the referendum. You know how many people came out and voted for the ULP? 32,099. So 32,000 people voted for ULP in 2005. 32,000 people voted for ULP in 2010. Yet, in the referendum, only 22,646 persons went out to vote. What became of the almost 10,000 ULP supporters who had voted in 2005 and 2010? You see, had the party supported their leader the way they ought to have done, the yes vote would have won. We would not have won the referendum because you needed a 2/3 majority. And we knew that from the time NDP pulled out, we knew it was going to be impossible for the yes vote to reach 66%, but at least we wanted the yes vote to be numerically more than the no vote. So when the yes vote came out at 22,000, I was disappointed, practically heartbroken, to know that after 6 years of toil and struggle and sacrifice, that the people did not support the proposed new constitution. No. So it means that the problems we saw in 2001, when both parties said we want to change the constitution, are still there. Now in 2019, they haven't gone away, they have got worse. And I'm saying to you, the people of this country, that sooner or later, a party in office has to get serious again and take up again the question of constitutional reform. Recently, we had this big debate about the presence of the monarchy in St. Vincent and Grenadines, where people seem to have forgotten that they voted to keep the British monarch as Queen of St. Vincent and Grenadines. That is what we voted to keep, this constitution. Not a word of it has changed since the two parties said they would change it in 2001. We're now about to celebrate 40 years of independence, 40 years of a system that needs to be improved. And my challenge to both parties is that jump high or low, you all will have to get back to the drawing board and present the people with a modified constitution. Hasn't got to be exactly like this one. But you have to modify the constitution if you want a better democracy in this country. If we want to improve our democracy, we have to make changes in the existing constitution. We cannot continue with one party winning election and dominating a totality of state power, and the other party who loses has nothing to get. So in the next few weeks, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to go through one by one these same 66 naught improvements and show you what it is that we rejected in November 2009. And many of the things that were rejected have come back to haunt those in opposition. So when they cry about this, that, and the other, I say to them, well, we had made proposals that would have got rid of the problem you're now identifying. They talk about they can't get their social and redemption charter heard in Parliament. Well, how you will get the social and redemption charter heard when it has in provision calling on the government to spend money and was overruled by the Speaker because it conflicted with the Constitution, which says an opposition can bring, or private member can bring to Parliament a measure asking the government to spend money. What sort of democracy we have? So if we want to improve our democracy, we have to improve our Constitution. It is as simple as that. Can't get away from it. And every time you hear there's a political controversy, you can trace its origins back to the winner-takes-all system we have, where the winning party monopolizes state power and the opposition party can only make noise. Not good enough. So I think we should pledge in our 40th anniversary that we will look again at the Constitution and see if a consensus can emerge about changes. And I will speak in some future program, Davy, about the CCJ, because it still baffles me that in this day and age, you're prancing and celebrating 40 years, and you still have no trust in your local judges, your regional judges. You still depend on the British Privy Council for your final judgments. And you are telling me that we are a people exuding self-confidence? Well, that is the opposite of self-confidence. We have no confidence in our own people. if we continue to rely on British judges for our final decisions in the Privy Council. But in Antigua, they voted to keep the Privy Council. In Grenada, they voted to keep the Privy Council. And in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, they voted to keep the Privy Council. So we are people without confidence in our local institutions and in our local sons and daughters. We need to improve our democracy, but more about that in a future program. So let us hope for the blessings of Almighty God as we wait on the storm, hopefully to come and pass. I hope any damage caused would not be beyond what we can bear. So that is all from this program of The Law and You, program number 947. I look forward to being of further service to you next week, Monday DV, for another presentation in this public service nation-building series, The Law and You. Do have a pleasant week, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, and may the good Lord continue to bless us all.
The Law and You, a look at laws in St. Vincent and the Grenadines which affect our daily lives. The Law and You, presented by lawyer panel P.R Campbell QC and brought to you on SVG-TV as a public service.